Again, the wind is raging, but I will not be shaken. For I know who's in control. You know, I think John questioned who was in control. But I think in the process, he found out who was in control. And that's a story he's going to come and share with you of how God really, I love these words in this song because there's so many pieces of John's story in this song. It says, I'm not afraid anymore because he is Lord. He's the maker of the promise. He will finish what he started. It says, Jesus Christ is Lord. And with a shout, the walls come down. Jesus Christ is Lord. In his name, the mountains bow. John has been preparing for this day for over a year. He hasn't written it down for over a year, but he's been preparing for this day for over a year. And John is the director of family ministries here at Trinity, or some of you might know him as the resident jokester, because nothing is serious for John. Everything is a joke. I find myself having to talk to him on the phone more than texting, because I never know if he's being serious or not. For example, every week I send out reminders through this system that we use to say who are the volunteers that are being part of worship. Well, John was down as the speaker this week, and so the email goes out, and about 10 minutes later I get a decline email. I'm like, I knew he was joking with that one, so I just texted Brat back because that's what he was doing. But as John comes and shares his story, we know that many of you, whether personally or a family member, have been affected by cancer in one form or another in your life. So we want to make sure that you know that we don't want to make light of any of your stories. This is just John's story. So don't take this as this is the way everyone's stories are, because John, as I said, his sense of humor, he adds that to his story. So if you're not quite sure what he means by something, you might want to ask him later, because he has some weird senses of humor sometimes. So, John, come and share with us.
Thanks, Jeff. All right, good morning, everyone. If you were here when I spoke the last time a couple weeks ago, you'll know I'm not really the public speaker like Pastor Dustin. But with that being said, sorry, Janice, where are you? Oh, right there. There you are. We might go a little longer than 10 minutes, 15 minutes like we've done the last time I've spoke. So just bear with us as we go through. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my testimony about how God has worked in my life. Many of you already know this, but for those of you who do not, my senior year of high school I was diagnosed with a rare form of leukemia called APML, which is acute promyelocytic leukemia. But today I'm not only going to be sharing with you my journey that my family and I experienced, but also what God is currently doing in my life. Today is an exciting day as it marks 10 years since I was told I had leukemia. At the end, I will share a few points that I learned and would like to issue a challenge to you. As I share this story, please bear with me, as I might get a little emotional during this time. My story begins, like many others, as a baby. I was fortunate enough to be raised in a Christian family. I always was involved with the church, and the majority of my life was spent attending Westview Wesleyan, which will always be home. I accepted God in my heart at a very young age. For the most part, I had an average Christian walk with God, attending youth group and different youth group outings. And one of those is partly why Dustin was not a youth pastor prior to becoming a lead pastor. Sorry, Lex, you can talk to us about that later if you want, but it was not until my senior year of high school where my story and testimony really takes off. While having a normal senior year, attending sporting events, playing soccer, and hanging out with friends, my life took an unexpected turn when on Tuesday, November 27th of 2007, while I was brushing my teeth, getting ready for school that morning, I noticed my gums started to bleed in the very back, close to where my wisdom teeth were. I tried jamming paper into it to try to get the bleeding to stop. It did not work, was not working, so I just went about my day and went to school with my gum bleeding all day. When I got home from school that day, I told my dad about it because he was already home from work, and he called the dentist and asked them if we could be seen that day, which the dentist allowed us to come in to get it checked out, where the dentist tried cauterizing my gum, which is basically taking a hot knife and trying to cut it out to get it to stop bleeding. And he said that if that did not work, then to come back on Thursday, so in a couple days, to get it checked out if it continued to bleed. While I was sleeping Tuesday night, I had a nosebleed and woke up the next morning with blood all over my pillow and face. I went to school Wednesday and Thursday with my mouth still bleeding and continued to wake up with blood all over my face and pillow. I even had a few nosebleeds during the day that would last several minutes each. When I got home from school on Thursday, I waited for my dad to get home as he was not home from work yet. And once he got home, we went to the dentist for him to look at my mouth. When we got there, the dentist looked at it and said that it actually looks like it has gotten worse over the last couple of days, and he did not know what was causing it. My dad then asked if it would be wise to go to our family doctor. So on that, the dentist agreed. So on Friday after school, my dad took me to see our family doctor. And he told us that it was probably nothing, just to go about my normal weekend like I would normally, and to wait till Monday to get some blood work done, as it was the end of the day on Friday, so he wanted fresh blood work for that week. Our doctor was thinking it was possibly hemophilia and wanted to rule that out. Saturday evening, while my mom was attending a basketball game, she saw a parent that was a dentist and continued to tell him what was going on with me. And he told her that I could try biting down on a tea bag, which don't try because it's very nasty, and it did not work to stop the bleeding, just so you guys know. On Sunday afternoons, my high school would play indoor soccer. So on that day, I was feeling a little weak, but was able to convince my dad to let me still go and play. But agreed if I would start feeling weak that I'd take some time out and sit down for a little bit and try to rest. After playing for a little bit, I did start feeling a little lightheaded, so I went ahead and sat out the rest of the day. And after coming home from playing soccer, I jumped in the shower to get ready for church that evening, as it was the children's Christmas program, and I really wanted to attend. As I was in the shower that evening, I noticed some bruising down the inner part of my thighs. After I got out of the shower and got dried off, I showed this to my dad, which he then called for my sister to come in and look at it as well. She was a nursing student at Indiana Wesleyan for her senior year. She did not say anything in front of me but right away she recognized it as petechiae, which was a sign of leukemia. My sister and my dad then went to her room and looked in her medical books to confirm what they had thought. While this was going on, I started to have another nosebleed, so my sister decided to stay home with me, and if I felt up to it, she would take me that evening to church. My parents then rode together to church, and my dad told my mom on the way that it looks like it could be leukemia. Once the nosebleed stopped, my sister and I then went to the church for the program. When I woke up Monday morning, I had more blood than ever on my pillow and face. From the previous Tuesday until Monday, I had somewhere between 15 and 20 nosebleeds that lasted at least 5 minutes each. My mom and sister took me that morning to get blood work done that my doctor ordered from the previous Friday. The first test was just a normal CBC, while the second was a blood clotting test where they would stick my arm 3 times to see how long it would take me to clot. As they prepped me for this blood clotting test, I was fortunate enough to have my sister sitting right across from me. When she realized from the CBC I had a huge bruise surrounding my arm from where they did the CBC, when they stuck me from the CBC. When the tech saw this, she decided to hold off on doing the blood clotting test and call the doctor. My mom went in the hallway to try to call my dad while getting a phone call at the same time from the doctor's office, with them saying to come to the office right now. While my mom was in the hall, I could hear her crying, and I still did not know they were suspecting leukemia. As we got in the car, I asked my mom and sister what was going on. Sorry. Which is when my mom turned around and told me they were suspecting leukemia. But we did not know for sure. Sorry, I still see it and can picture that day. We arrived at the doctor's office, and the 3 of us waited until my dad could get there before we went back to be seen by the doctor. When my dad arrived, we were taken into the back to talk to the doctor. Just before the doctor came out, our pastor and his wife walked in. Once the doctor came in, he talked to us for a little while and told us that everything is pointing like leukemia, but it still could be a couple other things, and that he had spoke with Riley Children's Hospital, and they were expecting us down there and gave us directions how to get there. After giving us this news, our doctor then said, I'm going to assume you're a Christian since you have your pastor in here, which I responded with, yes, I am. My doctor then did something amazing and asked if he could pray for my family and I as we took upon this journey. This is something that I will never forget. And I did not know until that moment my doctor was a Christian as well, and he actually cares. Although I did not see my doctor for many years while doing follow-up treatments, I have since started seeing him as my family doctor a couple years ago. Whether it is me or my parents that see he sees. He asks us about that day and how he still remembers giving us that news and how amazing everything has turned out. As we were leaving the doctor's office that day, I decided to ride with my dad instead of my mom and sister. And for those of you that don't know, my dad and I are very close. Once we got in the car, my dad said something very impactful to me, which was, even though you're facing this, we are here for you, and it is your outlook on this that could have an impact on how treatment and things go. So keep a positive attitude, and it will work out. When we arrived back at home to pack a few things before we went to Riley, as we were told to expect to be there a few days, we were met by my youth pastor, which is Jeff Lukey and Jennifer Jones's brother. My youth pastor prayed for us before we headed to Riley, and I was silent for most of the car ride, just listening to my iPod and praying to God for what we were about to go through. Just a minute. Once we arrived at Riley, they were expecting us, but there was still no room on the cancer floor, so we had to wait for several hours in the ER. While we waited in the ER, they started to check a few things and get IV started. At this point, I felt like I should start calling some friends and letting them know what was going on and to ask them to pray. While I was doing this, it started to hit me. I did not know what was going to happen, and I did not know what to think, besides I have leukemia. And what am I supposed to do now? After a short visit in the ER by my youth pastor and a couple friends, we were moved up to the cancer floor. Shortly after arriving into my room, one of my close friends called me back to share a Bible verse with me, which was John 14:27. And it says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid." When my friend read this verse to me, it really made me realize this is what God wants for my life, because it is His plan. And from that point on, I just trusted in God to bring me through this time in my life. I was fortunate enough to be given a room with a 2.5-year-old boy named Bryce that had neuroblastoma. It was a great thing for my family to be able to share this room with his family, because they had been dealing with Bryce's diagnosis for a little over 6 months at this point, so they were almost experts in something we knew nothing about. Not long after talking with Bryce's parents, we found out they were Christians as well. They were able to give a needed peace in a situation that was most desperately needed. One day when Bryce was returning from the playroom, my dad told him to get my toes. And he was very shy at first, but once he started to get them and I acted like he was tickling my feet, it became an occurrence every time I walked past my bed. While in the hospital the first couple nights, they were the most critical because I was losing so much blood. They did not know if I'd be able to make it. When I arrived at Riley, my platelet count was only 5,000, which a normal platelet count was 150, should be between 150,000 and 450,000. On the following Tuesday, I had a bone marrow biopsy done, and it was looking like I had AML, which is acute myeloid leukemia. I was given a spinal tap along with plans to insert a central line. I was also given many rounds of platelets and red blood cells. During this time, the staff at Raleigh was making plans to have both my parents and my sister tested for a bone marrow match in case a transplant would be needed at a later time. On Wednesday morning around 10 a.m., the charge nurse came in and told us that the pathologist report came in, and I did not have AML, but APML, which is acute promyelocytic leukemia, which is a very rare form of leukemia, but one of 8 subcategories of AML. Although being told having leukemia is never a good thing, we were encouraged to find out that APML is one of the better types of AML. It was decided that morning that I would not have a central line put in, but instead a PICC line, because they were afraid of losing me on the table because they could not keep the bleeding under control. Later that afternoon, a doctor came in and we learned that there would be 3 stages of treatment. They started me on an oral chemo and told us that the first 2 to 3 days would be very critical. On the 3rd day of treatment, I would receive 2 other types of IV chemo over the next 6 days. The doctor told us many of the possible side effects that could happen as a result of the chemo. But if all went well, I would be able to come home at the end of 10 days. We did not realize at this time the most critical part of the induction process meant that I could bleed out during that 2 to 3 days. The doctor informed my mom of several plans of action. But as my body was not responding to the medication like they had hoped, they suggested we jump to the final plan, which was move me to the ICU. The doctors did not think I was going to be able to make it much longer, and the ICU might be able to offer more care if that happened. Within half an hour, the doctors changed their minds and said they were already giving me the best care that they could. My bleeding finally seemed to slow down, but continued to monitor me as I spiked a high fever. My mom received word around 2:30 on Thursday afternoon at Lakeview Christian School, where she works, would be holding a special prayer time for me, and after that, they would start a 24-hour prayer vigil, which began at the end of that session. Teachers, parents, and students who were in attendance formed a line to sign up for half-hour time slots. Around 4 a.m., my fever had broken. The following Sunday evening, Westview Wesleyan Church held a prayer vigil, and there should be a picture of that night, maybe. Technical difficulties. Sorry. Maybe. Hey, there it is. Okay, sorry. Besides praying for my healing, protection, and traveling on the roads for my sister, as the next 3 days, she had finals for that semester. Another event Westview did was they had a head shaving party where 20 males shaved their heads and 5 females donated hair to Locks of Love. Dustin's hair still has never been the same. Can't see it, but he's kind of in the back row in there, so it's hard to see from that. But over the next few days, I started to develop many of the side effects of the chemo drugs the doctors had talked about. And I was even moved into a private room. Again, the headaches began to set in. I developed a bad rash and spiked yet another fever. I began to get sores all over my mouth and my tongue and down my throat. At this point, I had lost about 5 pounds and was just starting to lose my appetite, mainly because it was too hard to eat. The doctors were concerned, so they put me on a nutritional supplement called TPN. The hope of coming home at the end of 10 days was crushed. After losing around 18 pounds and being fever-free for 4 days, I was given the news on January 2nd, 2008, I would be discharged. There should be... There we go. When my family and I returned home for the first time together, 35 to 40 members of my youth group and youth sponsors welcomed us. And these are a couple pictures of that night. I was finally able to begin eating, but still lost another 5 more pounds, for a total of 23 pounds lost. My energy level began to pick up, but as I was confined to the house, due to my blood counts being too low to leave the house, I was not able to leave the house due to my blood counts being so low. Many friends and family would come by to encourage and keep my family and me company. I returned to Raleigh on Monday, January 14th for a scheduled checkup. I was given another bone marrow biopsy, had an EKG and an echogram, and everything that could have been read that day, we were given great reports. My ANC number, which is the number that was the deciding factor if I could stay in the house or if I could actually leave the house, was up from 247 to 807. I was given some of the best news at the time, which was I would be able to return to school the next day. The doctor then wanted to wait until January 21st to start the next round of treatment to make sure my counts would be plenty high enough in case the treatment dropped my counts back down. The treatment process they wanted to start was to first do 25 rounds of arsenic, which was 1 treatment per day for 5 weeks, for 5 days for 5 weeks. And then to take 2 weeks off and do another 25 rounds of arsenic. During this, the doctor did not know if this treatment process was FDA approved. Luckily, 1 year prior, in January of 2007, it became FDA approved, which meant insurance would cover this treatment. While taking this treatment, the doctors did not know what, if any, side effects I would have, because this was the first time Riley Hospital had used this treatment. I was fortunate enough not to have any side effects from the arsenic treatment. And there should be a picture of some of the nurses while I was taking that treatment from the outpatient center. As I was given permission by my doctor, if I would wrap my PICC line up, I could play soccer that spring, even if I was filling up to it. So I was able to play that spring on 2 different teams. And after the last set of arsenic, I would be given 2 weeks off treatment before starting an IV chemo for 3 days. I was given a few weeks off treatment since my counts dropped yet again as a result of the chemo. I received another 3 rounds of IV chemo, which my blood counts dropped again, and at this point, we were wondering if my counts would be elevated enough for me to be able to walk my high school graduation. Luckily, my counts were high enough for me to be able to walk at graduation, which I was greeted by a multitude of cheers from my classmates and many people in attendance that knew what the past several months was like. After attending Riley Hospital for another checkup, I was able to get the PICC line removed and started the final phase of my treatment process, which was to be on 3 oral chemos for a year. Like Dustin said, if you know me very well at all, you'll know that I love to play jokes on people and have a good time. I'd like to share a couple funny stories that happened as I was going through the treatment process. As many of you know, when you're on chemo, one of the first things that happens is you'll lose your hair. But a trick I did, which here's a picture of one of my senior pictures, I had really long hair. So when people would come in to see me at the hospital, I would just take a big chunk and pull it straight out and have a chunk and I'll offer it to them and see if they wanted to take home a chunk of hair. They wouldn't let me shave it for a while because they were afraid of nicking my head and bleeding issues. So we finally were able to get them convinced to let me do something with that. So after I was able to return to school and was attending a basketball game, one of my friends that graduated the previous year saw me and made a comment about, "Hey, John, you finally shaved your head. It looks good." In which I kind of puzzledly looked at him and was like, "Do you not know what's happened the last couple months?" And I was standing there with a mutual friend, and we kind of looked at each other, and when I told him that I had leukemia and lost it because of the treatment and everything, he was very, "Oh, sorry, I didn't know." And it was a funny story. We were able to have a good laugh, and he's still one of my better friends today, so I give him a hard time about that. One of the more serious moments, but funny now that we can look back on it, is when I was given a medication, and I was finishing using the restroom, and side note of all the chemo and TPN, you can have bathroom issues, so I quickly realized you had to sit down even to pee. So, we won't get into details. But as I went to stand up that day, I got really lightheaded and passed out I was in kind of like a adjoining room. So I shared, even though I was in a single room, we shared a bathroom together. So as I stood up that day and got lightheaded, I hit the door, smacking against that door, which my dad was in the restroom with me, and there was a nurse even in that room. She came banging on the door, freaking out because she heard somebody basically fall and hit. So that was a fun time when several nurses and doctors came to check me, and I still had my shorts down, laying on the floor. While we're on this subject, one night when my sister was staying with me, as I had to have help to the bathroom, I couldn't go, and I was just sitting there, and she's kind of facing the other way, so she's not watching me. And I just kept farting, and I said to her, "I bet you're just loving this," and we just had a good laugh about that. Another thing my sister would do to kind of torture me was once I started feeling better, I was encouraged to get up and start walking around the unit. So, with the IV poles, she would have a hold of my IV pole, and as I would start walking, if I was walking too slow, she would start pulling the IV pole and pulling my arm to keep me going because I was walking too slow. So, that was a good time. So, anyways. All right, enough. I can tell you so many stories, but we'll leave them at a few. All right, although leukemia is a big part of my testimony, that is not all God has been doing in my life since being diagnosed. Ever since I was a young boy, I always felt like God was calling me to pursue law enforcement. Due to treatments and checkups, I decided to attend Ivy Tech for criminal justice, since I knew you had to be 21 to become a police officer. At Westview Wesleyan, there's a large group of people that ride motorcycles, and one of the guys in the group leads a cancer benefit ride every year. For the cancer ride in 2009, I was asked if I could speak at that event, which we normally ride for 30 to 40 miles, take a break, and listen to someone share a testimony about themselves or a loved one, and then ride back. I agreed to speak at this event and realized that it was only a couple weeks shy of my last oral chemo dosage. At the end of these events, there is normally a meal, and I thought it would be fun to celebrate with my fellow bikers, family, and people from Westview Wesleyan, as a thank you to celebrate the end of being on chemo. We then scheduled a party for cake and ice cream following the meal to celebrate the end of treatment. There's a picture of that day. It was in the weeks leading up to this event when I sent a message to a female friend on Facebook asking them if they would be in the area because they were attending school in Palm Beach, Florida, which I found out they would be in the area, so I invited her to come to the party. Little did I know that she would actually show up. We even would be able to hang out one time after this event before she went back to Florida for her senior year of college. This would then start a chain reaction of us talking on Facebook and texting back and forth before she decided to move back to Indiana. I was happy when I found out this news because not news out because I really liked her. Once she arrived in Indiana, we hung out that evening, and shortly after, we started dating, and a year after that, we got married. Which is Stacy, just in case you guys were wondering. I haven't been married twice. I was even fortunate enough to have Bryce be the ring bearer at my wedding. There's a picture of us that day. I'm going to be sharing something with you that is going to come as a shock to my family as well as many others. As what I'm about to share, only 2 people know about this. During the time towards the end of my treatment, I was struggling with my walk with God. I felt I was not accepted in my church anymore, and because I did not attend college at Indiana Wesleyan, everyone just felt sorry for me because I was the guy that had leukemia, and they had to invite me. I was in a very dark place, and even thought about taking my own life a couple times. As it would just have made everything so much easier for my life. I briefly shared some of this with my best friend since grade school. And he was able to get me connected with the pastor he knew. And I was able to open up with this pastor, as he was someone that only knew what my friend had shared with him, and he wouldn't be able to tell my parents because he didn't even know them. I was able to go through a book called The Purpose-Driven Life. I was able to realize how great of an impact my story and what my life should be like. The pastor friend that I share this with, I have not been in contact with him since meeting with him, but I found out this past week, which I knew a couple years ago, he was diagnosed with cancer. And this past week, he took a turn for the worse. It does not sound like he's going to make it much longer. So, sorry. Something that I've only shared with a few people, but I have felt like writing a book is a way to accomplish being able to tell my story, as I felt God has wanted me to do something with it. I just have never done it. A little over 2 years ago, while on a weekly meeting with my closest friend's dad, who was a mentor to me, asked me randomly if I ever thought about pursuing something in ministry. I quickly said, "No way. That is not for me." He then advised me not to be so quick to say no, but to pray about it. I agreed while still thinking, there is no way. That following Sunday, while at church, I was listening to the pastor's sermon, and it was about following your calling. While the pastor was talking, my dad was in the hallway with our oldest daughter, Abby. So I was going to use that as a reason to leave, thinking, I don't need to listen to this. I'm doing law enforcement. As I was thinking about leaving, the pastor says, "Don't leave. I know you were thinking about it. This is for you." This was a big wake-up call as I continued to sit and listen to the rest of the message. It felt like I got smacked in the face, and I was to pursue ministry instead of law enforcement. I felt so called in that moment that I was ready to go in Monday morning to the sheriff's department and quit my job. After talking with Stacy and my parents and telling them about this, they strongly advised that I talk to Pastor Buddy before I do anything with my job. After talking with both of them, over the next couple weeks, I met with my mentor and Pastor Buddy. After talking with both of them, it was decided that even though God was calling me into ministry, He does not necessarily want me to quit my job, not without knowing the next step. I agreed and started searching hard for a full-time ministry job, but quickly found out that it is hard to have a full-time job in ministry without a bachelor's degree in ministry or at least 4 years experience in ministry. As I prayed about what the next step is, I looked for jobs at Indiana Wesleyan, as it might be a way to get my degree without having to pay for school to get my bachelor's degree. While looking for other jobs, I would keep looking for a position at a church, preferably dealing with children. While I applied for a job at Indiana Wesleyan, I continued my search of local churches, which I was coming up empty. I just was starting to click on random churches from a Google search within driving distance from my house. I came across a posting looking for a children's director at Trinity United Methodist in Hartford City. I was at work while at the sheriff's department looking at this and decided I didn't have enough time to apply. So I just looked around on the church's webpage, and I discovered that the pastor was Dustin Jones. I thought to myself, I know this guy. He was a youth sponsor when I was in the youth group at Westview. Instead of applying for the position, I needed to talk to him in person, so I sent him a private message on Facebook, since we were already friends, asking him if we could talk about this position and explain what has happened in my life in the past 6 months. While we talked a little back and forth on Facebook, and we were finally able to meet and talk about the position. As you can probably tell, since we were here at Trinity, I was able to get my start in ministry. One of the biggest things I learned is to trust in God through any situation. How much my friends and family mean to me. Through always being there for me when I need them. The power of prayer is an amazing and wonderful thing. If you are struggling with something in your life, then seek someone out and talk to them. I have learned that people are watching you everywhere you go, and you are being a witness to those people watching you. I learned this through a letter I received from someone I barely knew. She played soccer on the girls' team, and I played soccer on the boys' team with her brother. The letter reads, I don't know you very well, but my first impression of you was a good one. Just from talking to you a few times, hearing about you from my brother and the other guys that were on the soccer team, I was able to figure out that you are a Christian. I cried when Coach Keller called and said you had been diagnosed with leukemia. I thought, John is my age. He is so young and healthy. He will be graduating high school in the spring. He has so much going for him. It hit me pretty hard because I have never really known anyone around my age that has been diagnosed with fatal disease. It could have been me, was all I could think of. I sat and thought about how I was wasting my life with the pointless things, like an argument with my siblings, stressing about if anyone will ask me to prom and such, when I should be savoring every moment. You made me really think about how my life and how I would live differently if I were diagnosed with fatal disease. But I should not have to think about how I would live differently. I should live every day like it is a gift from God. So in a way, you have inspired me without ever knowing it. Thank you. As I read James 1, while I was praying for you, that is my favorite chapter of the Bible. I love how it talks about persevering through all kinds of trials and growing closer to God because of them. I was using my mom's Bible when I read it because it was handy, and I saw she had penciled in at the top of the page, trials are God's curricula for teaching us to grow and change. That helped a lot. I thought about you as you were going through this extremely tough time, that you will be growing and changing to become more like Christ, and in the process, people will see how you handle this and grow as well. Is that awesome or what? You have already helped me. When I was able to read this letter after finally coming home, it made me realize how your actions in living a life as an example of God can make an impact on someone's life. As we are coming to a close here today, I would like to leave you with a few challenges. We always need to be ready to meet Christ because we never know what is going to happen to us or when something tragic will happen. We need to make sure our hearts are in the right place so if something were to happen to us, we would be ready. Do not take family, friends, and things for granted. Live your life how God intends for it. If you feel God is calling you to do something, don't shy away, but pray and seek people out to pray with you. Before I exit and Jeff comes back up, I want you to know that through all this, it has made me stronger in my walk with God. I would not change anything that has happened, for this story is what God intended for my life. It makes me who I am today. And in case I don't get to thank anybody who's made a special trip after this, I'd like to say thank you.
If you would, stand with me. For our guests, when we leave, we like to receive our blessing as we go. So if you would, stretch out your hands to receive God's blessing. God, I just pray that John's story wouldn't just be simply a story of something that went on in his life, God. I pray that we would see his story in light of your story. That John is just a chapter in your amazing story. God, I pray that each one of us would see that we too are a part of your story, God. God, I pray that we would live our lives not taking one moment for granted. I pray that we would cherish the people around us. God, I pray that our lives would bless each other. And that out of our lives blessing them, then we might receive our blessing. God, we thank you for your faithfulness. Amen.